Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 7th Annual Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team Summit. This year's theme is the evolution of local humanitarian open mapping ecosystems, understanding community collaboration and contribution. We're so thrilled to have each and every one of you joining us today for what we're sure will be an incredible summit. And we're so happy that everybody was able to join from all over the globe and to learn and collaborate with one another. We have an incredible lineup of speakers for you today, including our first keynote from Paula Gil Baizan of the Norwegian Refugee Council. But before diving into the program, just a couple of quick housekeeping updates. So like last year, this year's summit is running across 3 time blocks. You're catching us on the last time blocks, the Americas. But if you want to review the full schedule and see the program of Africa and Europe and Asia Pacific, please head back to the reception tab and scroll down to review the full schedule. Before we begin, we wanted to shout out our amazing sponsors for this year's summit. A huge thanks to our summit stage sponsor, Meta, for their incredible and continuous support of HOT. Further, a massive thanks to AWS, Esri, and Critigen. We're incredibly grateful for all of our sponsors' support and commitment to humanitarian mapping community. And make sure to stop by their booths in the expo hall. And there's also a few Goose Chase missions around there as well. A couple more reminders, please do tweet, Facebook, Instagram, all the things, your videos, photos, and reactions using the hashtag HotSummit2021 on social media. A reminder that each session will open 5 minutes before the start time, but each session is being held in its own room. We've factored in a few short breaks and a longer 15-minute break in the middle, so make sure to stay hydrated, eat a snack, keep your headphones charged, and yeah, get some snacks. Based on feedback from last year, we're excited to share all of the new functionality on the Hopin platform. So make sure to check out the networking space to meet some of our hundreds of fellow humanitarian open mapping enthusiasts. I think Rachel just said that we have over 500 people registered for this event. So that should be a great space to find some interesting conversations. The summit is being recorded, and you can always review the talks directly on the Hopin platform over the next week, and then they'll be posted on the Hot OSM YouTube channel. For those participating in the Goose Chase virtual scavenger hunt, remember today is the final day to get all of your submissions in, and the winner will be announced via social media following the summit. Finally, if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback, don't hesitate to reach out directly on the Hopin platform via a private message or send an email to summit@hotosm.org. Finally, we're excited to share that GeoAwesomeness will be donating $1 to HOT and Map Action for every subscription to the GeoAwesomeness newsletter. So please do check out their website and subscribe to support HOT, Map Action, and GeoAwesomeness. All right, just before introducing our keynote speaker, a note that if you do have a question for the speakers today, please drop them into the stage Q&A section of the platform throughout the talk, and then people will have the option to upvote your question. And when we go into live Q&A, we'll try and address all of those questions. Time permitting, they'll be answered. For those that we don't get to, we'll have a report of all the questions that we can send to the speakers. Also, there's an option to ask the questions anonymously if you prefer. So without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce you to our keynote, Paula Gil Baizan from the Norwegian Refugee Council, for her talk on finding our place for pathways into the future of aid.
Hello, I'm Paula Gil Baizan, and I lead NRC's innovation work globally. I was very happy when I was invited to do this presentation. I've invested the last 18 years of my professional life trying to find new ways of generating value for people affected by poverty and crisis. And I've always found the talent and passion of the mapping community so inspiring. I've been following from the outside with a lot of admiration how the idea of humanitarian OpenStreetMap has been evolving and growing. So I'm very happy to be here speaking to you today, but to be totally transparent, I was going to be here whether I was speaking or not, because I'm a big fan of the work that you all do. And it's not very rare. I mean, think about it. Who else can confidently claim a steady evolution into a global network of global talent? I have applauded from a distance the determined steps that you have taken to make people in the most remote places visible through mapping their surroundings. You have shaped satellite imagery into a form of humanitarian presentation. Your work has pushed the humanitarian sector to think differently about what we do. And as you look forward into what is next for you and your work, my hope is that through this keynote, you will be able to be inspired to use your work to push the humanitarian sector to think differently about its identity. So this story I want to tell begins with place. The concept of place is intrinsic to what you do in mapping, and it also defines so many important things about the humanitarian sector. As you know better than I do, the debate on the concept of place dates back to the beginning of the 20th century and has gone through many, many iterations. The progressive view of place now is incredibly exciting because it includes the understanding of it as the context for all human interactions and activities linked to the individual's memories and emotions. In this view of place, places are no longer rigid and isolated entities. They are inherently relational and connected with other places, rather than being isolated containers in which social interaction occurs. The mapping community has evolved to understand place as a fundamentally human phenomenon that incorporates not only spatial aspects, but it also invested with meaning that comes from context, culture, and lived experience of everyday life. In this view, places can be of any scale, including a tent. They can also be movable, and people can be in many places at once. So right now, I'm in Bamako, in my place of residence and my neighborhood, and it is simply a matter of scale which of these places would be of interest depending on what you want to know about me. I personally think this evolution towards a multi-layered and adaptive concept is beautiful and so much in line with the type of world we should be building. Now, the concept of place also plays an important role in humanitarian aid because it is a defining component of vulnerability and also a key design element for our operations. And I want you to know that our understanding of place has not evolved as much as it should have. Our understanding of place is as linear and as rigid as our business model is. We think of ourselves as a pipeline designed to deliver as quickly and as cheaply as possible from point A to point B, when we should be thinking of aid as a platform that enables the networks who are closer to the problem to have all the resources available to innovate against that problem and solve it. We translate this outdated understanding of place into our practices, and then wonder why we can't really make a dent on systemic issues like gender-based violence or protection of civilians in complex contexts like the one I can see through my window here in Mali. It is also one of the reasons why we sometimes end up with definitions of vulnerability that are flat and ignorant of people's complex and multi-layered realities of need. Our conception of place in the humanitarian world is traditionally Western and colonial. The humanitarian sector, as you know, is divided into agencies that follow the logic of nation states, not only through their funding, but also through their reach. Agencies slide the world into 8 territories they feel comfortable operating in. US agencies in Latin America, French NGOs in West Africa, and this perpetuates systems of oppression through the experience people have of aid. Elements related to place in the process of assessing people's humanitarian needs tends to be singular, stationary, and usually set by an external observer who strips it from all connotation to contextual lived experience or culture. We in the humanitarian world talk a lot about localization, but if we're honest, We don't back that talk with meaningful action to divest finances and decision-making power from the global into the local. We also talk a lot about putting people at the center of our work, but we haven't necessarily transformed our business models to generate space for people's wisdom and changing preferences to be the defining motivate. Our understanding of place in the humanitarian world is still extractive and divisive. It is the 21st century right now, and sometimes we still behave towards vulnerable people and communities like French men did mapping the Pacific Ocean, for example, dividing and slicing what in fact was a network of connected islands. The existence of these lines and divisions and this very sort of linear way of thinking about place has been so powerful that it has taken over our imaginations, our identity narratives in the humanitarian sector. I firmly believe it is time to stop this before it continues to project into our future identity. We pretend through the process of humanitarian reform that the leaders who built the system are the ones who will choose to dismantle it. But my hope for a different kind of sector doesn't lie there. My hope for a different kind of sector that is built on local wisdom and global empathy is in people like you who operate locally, which is why I'm so excited to be here today. And I've seen you in the field, thriving in the face of chaos. So I'd like to throw out a challenge, if I may. I want to put out an innovation challenge to create maps that confront the current and future identity of the humanitarian sector. Help us create maps that don't perpetuate the reductionist view of place the humanitarian sector is built on. Maps that incentivize our ability to think and act systemically. Help us come up with that. And to help you along this challenge, I can think of 4 pathways into that better version of the future of aid to get us started. So the first one is, please use your local networks to tap into that rich intergenerational geographical knowledge to bring a different lens to understand the complexity of place and need. Categorization is what colonialists do. Don't feed our need to break into clusters, label, slice, extract, and divide through the maps that you produce. Help us instead through your work to tap into indigenous knowledge to understand the interconnections in and of places so that the models that we build on top of your maps are naturally systemic. Can you imagine how different it would be if we were able to have conversations about natural hazards in a community or resettlement options for displaced people, not only by defining the geographical elements, but also the cultural meaning certain places have for the community and the individuals within it? Second pathway in the way to this channel. Be mindful that politics determine the types of maps you make. Satellite imagery can provide the data needed to address critical challenges like climate change, deforestation, food security, and natural disasters. We all know that. But we also know that satellite imagery can also provide the data needed to perpetuate centuries of oppression. So please, inject ethics into all layers of your projects. Look, for example, at your networks. How many connections away are you from a defense contractor? Know this. Be mindful and aware of the systemic connections of what you produce. Third pathway into this innovation challenge. Democratize the ability to generate insights. One thing is making data easily accessible to everyone. And another very different thing is also democratizing the specialized skills and resources needed to be able to extract insights from that data. We know satellite imagery makes emergency response quicker and more efficient. I have seen it in the field myself. But how can the mapping community now contribute to truly enact the localization agenda by ensuring local actors of all shapes and sizes have access to the data and the technology that makes big international humanitarian NGOs win the grants and demonstrate the impact? Can you imagine a world like that? And fourth and final, how can we find new ways to predict and preempt future crises? Change, as you know, is happening so rapidly and so dramatically that we need to find other tools to map it. How might we use satellite imagery and other technologies to understand the scope, the scale, and the urgency of the most complex issues affecting vulnerable people globally? How could maps change the way we understand the humanitarian effects of climate change at a granular level? How can we better deal with the problems with humanitarian access as a result of global radicalization driven by the rejection of the other along religious and political lines? How can maps enable us to design layered multi-sectoral assistance at the neighborhood level? How can maps help us produce financial resources for aid by generating empathy for places people have never visited and people they have never met? The ocean is turbulent, my grandmother would say, and I haven't even used the word pandemic. So the challenge is out there for you. How can maps help us chart the course amidst impending uncertainty? I'd like to finish this little talk by thanking you for spending time with me today. Your work has the power to transform the lives of vulnerable people everywhere. I hope that this little chat has seeded some ideas on how to do that. Please continue to be courageous, local, and innovative. Be sure that I will be cheering you on from the sidelines. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paula, for that incredible talk. We'll now move to live Q&A. So we have a couple questions coming into the chat window. Let's start with Paula. I loved your comment on democratizing the ability to generate insights. Are there particular experiences or skills you think are needed to make that a reality?
Yes, and I think that is such an important part of having a conversation about what needs to be done to localize aid, right? Because one thing is to be able to say, oh yes, we're going to build the capacity and capability of local organizations to attract funding. But we all know that that funding opportunity is never really going to materialize if that NGO is not able to showcase they understand the context, but that they also are able to analyze the data from the context to generate some insights. So for me, it's not only in terms of let's make sure that people have the technology to map. It's let's make sure that we transfer the technology that allows us to generate the analysis that comes from that mapping. In my experience, that is harder to come by. In an agency like NRC, it's easy for us to then go out and try to find that skill set so that we can use the data that people like you provide, right? And so that we can generate insights that allows us to program better. But for a local NGO, the insights that they generate are basically based on experience, and that is not necessarily always as valued as the insights as an NGO like us would provide. So what I would like is for that to change. I would like to value the experience generated from experience as much as the insights that are generated from using all sorts of tools and other analytical frameworks to do that. And best case scenario, imagine if local actors had the ability to do both, to generate insights from experience together with insights that come from using all of those frameworks. That for me would be an ideal scenario.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And just curious, how were you first introduced to HOT as an organization?
I've been a fan for many years. So first, I knew about the OpenStreetMap initiative when I was working in Palestine, and I was trying to figure out who could give me a very detailed map, right? Who could give me a very detailed map that understood like the at the level of granularity of streets. And they were like, impossible, that doesn't exist in Gaza. And I was like, really? How is this possible? And then people started to say, well, there's this crazy organization, they're trying to figure it out. And that's how I first came across. And then I was working for Save the Children in Typhoon Haiyan. And there I saw all these people working in the field, connecting with lots of other people online. And I thought, this is the future. So I've been a fan following from the sidelines ever since, trying to understand how does this idea of what I think humanitarian assistance should be like in the future is being growing up. And I'm really happy to see what you've grown up into.
Okay, we have another question from the audience. It says, this morning, David Garcia cited the need to beware of recolonialism. He referred to data creation and ownership. What can humanitarians do better to respect local knowledge?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, we need to start by understanding that we don't own anything where we operate. Okay. So humanitarians tend to have these maps where they put their logo where they're operating. And I just find that a little bit offensive because we don't own anything. We are there to support someone else. So if we can then extrapolate that to the way that we extract information from people to be able to design our programs, that's also not necessarily very much in line with the idea of we're only here temporarily to support your own recovery. So I would say we need to almost change the model in which we think that aid needs to be built. First of all, the data that we collect should not be extracted to serve our purposes. It should actually be people who know where to find us to tell us the data that they think is important so that we can serve them in a different way. You see, their relationship changes dramatically if it's people who are starting to make contact instead of me asking them, so what's your name? How many people are in your family? It's completely different than if I am the one who's calling in and say, hello, this is my name, and what I would like you to know about me is that the place where I live in is unsafe, or that I have 2 children and I require some assistance for their education. So for me, we will never be able to go through in the future in a model of aid that is not colonial if we do not understand that all of this language around localizing aid, putting people at the center, is still colonial. What we really need to do is to change the model so that is driven by people, their needs, their priorities, and we actually become a competitive service provider.
Great. Okay, next question. On the question, how do we localize aid? Often for mapping communities, that question can become how do we localize community engagement? Do you have any advice on community engagement approach?
Yes. So I grew up in Mexico, right? And there's nothing more offensive than having someone coming to the place where you grew up and where you're from, trying to understand something by extracting the knowledge that you have, when actually you could be doing their job better. So my biggest advice would be respectful of local talent. So engage the people that are locally, not from the point of view of the expert, right? The expert engaging with a community. Engage the community from the point of view of their own expertise. And then you will find that knowledge comes in many shapes and forms. It doesn't only come from the point of view of experience doing something, a degree of doing something, but the lived experience of having been in a place is usually very, very much valuable. So engage people as experts with the same respect that you would engage experts internationally. That would be my top advice if I had to choose one.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly helpful advice, especially as we think about community engagement, specifically in our regional hubs too, as we sort of are building those out or continue to build them out. I loved one of your points around how can maps help us to develop empathy. And I was wondering if you have any examples of maps where you've seen that have been able to do that, or even looking at those 4 pathways that you mentioned, like any maps or specific projects that you've come across where you thought really met those pathways.
Yes. So I have been doing some work with young people using futures and foresight to be able to provide another way of thinking about what is possible for them going forward, right? Because I am a strong believer that if you can imagine other things for you and your community, once you've imagined them, it's easier then to go ahead and do them. while we've been doing some of this work, I did some of this work with gang communities in the Northern Triangle of Central America. One of the participants was actually into mapping. And this young guy started to do a map of what his life in a community would be like if certain things change in terms of violence. So that for me is the most powerful experience that I've had of bringing together all of these worlds that I think are so transformational. Because when you map out what your neighborhood would look like if something that is affecting your life changes, then you can reimagine your own life within that community. And I think that is incredibly powerful. So next time a humanitarian agency comes up and says, hey, give us a map, give them a map of what they can see, and then give them a map of what they should see. Tell them like what they should be seeing in terms of green spaces for children, in terms of their ability to have shops near where camps are. So not only give them the maps of the reality, give them the maps of the future. You have no idea how much that visual representation will change the way humanitarians work. And if there's anyone that has the ability to do that in a visually engaging way, it's you.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting too, because that would also, I think, allow for that first pathway that you mentioned around like pulling intergenerational knowledge onto the map too, because I think oftentimes in order to really reimagine the future, we have to like pull in information or knowledge from the past too, from our community and from, you know, elders in our community as well, to really reimagine like a brighter future.
Absolutely, like bring back all these other funky ways of mapping that we've forgotten because we just like lines and squares. And so, for example, bring back like relational maps, maps that map out like we did this in an exercise in Bamako a couple of weeks ago with a place I'm volunteering with, and what we were mapping was not the street, because in Bamako the streets have no name and sometimes they disappear if they're flooded. What we were mapping were the avenues that people know they can take to be able to get support in terms of their social capital. So show us, teach us a different way of understanding our place, our surroundings as humanitarians, by bringing in how people locally understand place. I think that would be incredibly transformational.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So one last one from the audience. How can HOT influence better behavior from NGOs? AKA the example that you mentioned around stopping from putting logos on maps as sort of like proprietary pieces of knowledge.
Yes, I think NGOs can learn a lot from the way that you manage your community internally, in terms of who gets to decide stuff, how do you produce stuff, where's the center of knowledge. I don't know if NGOs should be influenced to change their behavior, but if we look at it from a business point of view, you are a supplier. So if you change your own behavior in terms of the products that you offer, you will definitely change the way that the sector consumes your projects, right? Your products. So you don't have to change the sector, just change yourself, change your products, change the ethics in which you manage your products, change the offer that you provide. And I'm sure that because we're so dependent on the great work you do, we will inevitably change the way we work as well. So start with yourselves. You're known for doing radical stuff. Go out, be brave, be radical, and we will have to follow because you are a unique provider.
Amazing. I love that. Love that advice. Lead by example for sure. Well, thank you so much, Paula, for that incredible opener. And that concludes our opening session for the America's Time Block. We'd invite you to move into the sessions room, which you can find on the Hopin platform, and start attending the next series of talks. Again, you can explore the whole schedule on the reception page of Hopin, or you can click on the sessions page directly. Thanks again, and we'll see you back on the meta stage for the closing keynote.